Racist biker snatches a black soldier's gun. What happens next is shocking. The crowd screamed in panic as the biker roared down the street, clutching the sleek black rifle he had just snatched. He balanced it awkwardly, clearly untrained, his leather jacket flapping wildly in the wind. The black soldier, broad-shouldered and imposing, chased after him, his face a mix of fury and desperation. The street was chaos, with people diving out of the way and cars honking furiously. "Stop him," the soldier shouted, his voice booming over the commotion. But no one moved. Fear had frozen the bystanders, their eyes fixed on the surreal scene playing out before them. The biker skidded to a halt in the middle of the road, the rifle in one hand, and turned to face the soldier with a sneer. His friends, 5 other bikers, circled the soldier like vultures, revving their engines and laughing. "You think you own this town, huh?" the biker snarled, raising the rifle and pointing it directly at the soldier's chest. The soldier stopped in his tracks, hands clenched at his sides, his military training the only thing keeping him calm. "Put the gun down," he said evenly, his deep voice trembling just slightly. The biker's grin widened. He placed his finger on the trigger. 2 days earlier, Malik Thomas stepped off the bus in the small southern town of Wayland, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and his crisp army uniform. Drawing stares, he wasn't unfamiliar with the attention. Some gazes were curious, others were hostile. Malik was used to it. As a black soldier, traveling through certain parts of the country always felt like walking into enemy territory. He was here to visit his younger sister, Kayla, who had recently started college in the area. They hadn't seen each other in months, and Malik wanted to surprise her. The town itself seemed quaint at first glance, rows of mom-and-pop shops, diners with checkered tablecloths, and a park where kids laughed and played. Malik had barely stepped into the diner when the whispers started. A group of bikers sitting in the corner exchanged glances. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo curling around his neck, leaned in close to the others and muttered something. They burst out laughing. Malik ignored them. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He ordered a burger, scarfed it down, and headed to the college dorms to find Kayla. She greeted him with a squeal, throwing her arms around his neck. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she exclaimed. "I wanted it to be a surprise," Malik said with a grin. They spent the day catching up, laughing over childhood stories, and touring the campus. Kayla introduced him to her friends, who were eager to meet her hero brother. For a while, Malik forgot about the uneasy feeling the town had given him. That night, Malik walked Kayla back to her dorm and started the long trek to his motel on the edge of town. The streets were quiet, lit only by flickering lampposts. He was halfway there when he heard the hum of motorcycle engines behind him. He turned, squinting into the darkness. 6 bikers approached, their headlights cutting through the night like knives. Malik recognized the snake-tattooed man from the diner. He was leading the pack. "Can I help you?" Malik asked, his voice calm but firm. The bikers didn't answer. They circled him slowly, their engines growling. "You think you're some big shot, walking through our town like you own it," the leader sneered. "I'm just passing through," Malik replied. "I don't want any trouble." "Well, trouble found you," the biker said with a smirk. One of the bikers lunged at him, but Malik was faster. He sidestepped and grabbed the man's arm, twisting it until he dropped the wrench he was holding. The other bikers swarmed him. Malik fought hard, his military training giving him an edge, but 6 against 1 was no fair fight. Eventually, they backed off, leaving him bruised but standing. The leader stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "This ain't over, soldier boy," he hissed. The next day, Malik reported the incident to the local police. The officer behind the desk, a middle-aged man with a coffee-stained uniform, listened with disinterest. "We'll look into it," he said flatly, scribbling on a notepad. Malik didn't hold his breath. He spent the day with Kayla again, but his mind was elsewhere. Something told him the bikers weren't done with him yet. He was right. That evening, as Malik walked through the town square, the roar of motorcycles filled the air. The same gang from the night before appeared, but this time, they weren't alone. The square was crowded, and the bikers had an audience. They circled Malik again, their taunts louder, their laughter harsher. "What's the matter, soldier boy? You scared?" the leader mocked. Malik stood his ground. "I'm warning you. Leave me alone," he said. The leader dismounted his bike, swaggering toward him. Before Malik could react, the biker lunged forward and yanked the rifle from the sling on his back. The crowd gasped as the biker raised the gun. Triumphantly, a twisted grin on his face. "What's the big deal? I'm just borrowing it," he shouted, laughing. Malik's heart pounded. He knew what this looked like, and he knew how dangerous the situation had just become. The leader pointed the rifle at him, his finger hovering over the trigger. And then, an engine roared louder than the rest, shattering the tension. From behind the circle of bikers, a black pickup truck screeched to a halt. Its headlights blazed as a figure stepped out, silhouetted against the glare. "Drop the damn gun," the man barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The leader hesitated, his cocky grin faltering. Malik, still rooted in place, glanced at the newcomer. It was an older man, grizzled and wiry, with a face weathered by years of hard living. His cowboy hat shaded his eyes, but there was no mistaking the authority in his voice. "This ain't your business, old man," the biker leader spat, regaining his composure. "I'm makin' it my business." The man shot back, taking a deliberate step forward. In the eerie quiet, the click of his boots on the asphalt sounded like gunshots. "You don't know what you're messin' with, son." The tension was palpable. The crowd, which had been frozen in place, began murmuring. Some edged closer, sensing the possibility of a fight. Malik used the distraction to assess his options. His training kicked in, and his mind raced through possible scenarios. He could disarm the biker, but not without putting himself, and the onlookers, at risk. The leader sneered and raised the rifle higher, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. "What are you gonna do about it, huh? You some kind of hero?" Before the old man could respond, Malik made his move. He lunged forward, closing the distance in a flash. His hand clamped down on the rifle barrel, yanking it upward as the leader stumbled back in surprise. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet tearing harmlessly into the night sky. Chaos erupted. The crowd screamed and scattered, and the other bikers surged forward. Malik twisted the rifle out of the leader's hands and shoved him to the ground. But he had no time to celebrate. The rest of the gang was closing in fast. The old man moved like lightning, grabbing a crowbar from the back of his truck. He swung it with surprising strength, knocking one biker clean off his feet. Malik, now armed with his rifle again, used the butt of the gun to fend off another attacker. The fight was brutal, messy, and over in minutes. When the dust settled, 3 bikers lay groaning on the pavement. The other 3, including the leader, had jumped on their motorcycles and fled. Malik was breathing hard, his knuckles bloodied, but he was standing. The old man leaned against his truck, tipping his hat back to wipe the sweat from his brow. "You all right, soldier?" he asked. Malik nodded, though his heart was still pounding. "Yeah, thanks for the assist." The man chuckled. "Don't mention it. Name's Earl, by the way." "Malik," he replied, extending a hand. Earl shook it firmly, his grip rough and calloused. The police arrived a few minutes later, their sirens wailing. To Malik's dismay, they seemed more interested in dispersing the crowd than questioning the bikers who had escaped. One officer approached him, his expression cold. "You want to tell me what happened here?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Malik took a deep breath, explaining the events as calmly and clearly as he could. Earl chimed in, backing up his story. But the officer didn't seem convinced. "Looks to me like you were in the middle of some trouble," the cop said, narrowing his eyes at Malik. "We don't take kindly to folks stirring up fights around here." Malik's temper flared, but Earl stepped in before he could respond. "Now hold on just a damn minute," Earl said, his voice low and dangerous. This man was defending himself from those punks. "You want to blame someone, blame the bikers." The officer hesitated, clearly intimidated by Earl's no-nonsense demeanor. After a tense moment, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. Malik sighed, his frustration evident. I don't get it. I'm the victim here. Welcome to Wayland, Earl said grimly. Justice ain't blind in a place like this. The next morning, Malik was nursing a sore shoulder at the diner when Earl slid into the booth across from him. Hope you don't mind, Earl said, nodding toward Malik's untouched plate of eggs. Figured I'd check in on you. Thanks, Malik said. I'm fine. Just trying to figure out what's next. Well, I hate to break it to you, but those bikers ain't gonna let this go, Earl said, his tone serious. You embarrassed their leader. That's a wound that don't heal easy. Malik frowned. What's their deal, anyway? Why are they after me? Earl scratched his chin thoughtfully. They've always been trouble, but lately, they've gotten bolder. Guess they think this town belongs to a soldier like you? You're a threat to their little kingdom. Malik leaned back in his seat, processing Earl's words. He wasn't afraid of a bunch of thugs, but he wasn't naive either. This was bigger than a personal vendetta. Any advice? Malik asked. Earl smirked. Yeah. Don't underestimate M. And if you're gonna stick around, you'd better be ready for a fight. Later that day, Malik visited Kayla to check on her. She greeted him with a hug, oblivious to the danger lurking just outside her dorm. Everything okay? She asked, noticing the tension in his face. Yeah, he lied. Just thinking about heading back soon. Her face fell. Already? I thought you were staying for the weekend. I'll see, he said, ruffling her hair. You just focus on your classes, all right? As he left, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and he glanced over his shoulder. A motorcycle idled at the corner of the street, its rider obscured by shadows. Malik clenched his fists, ready for whatever came next. That night, as Malik walked back to his motel, the roar of engines filled the air once again. This time there were more of them, at least a dozen bikes there. Headlights blazing like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. Malik tightened his grip on the rifle slung over his shoulder. He knew this wasn't going to end without a fight. The engines roared like thunder, echoing through the empty streets. Malik stopped in his tracks, his eyes darting between the glaring headlights. The dozen bikers surrounded him in a loose circle, their bikes humming as they slowly closed in. At the head of the pack was the leader, his sneering face illuminated by the glow of a streetlight. Well, look who's still in town, the leader jeered, his voice dripping with malice. I thought we taught you a lesson, soldier boy. Malik tightened his grip on the rifle. If you're here for round 2, you're gonna regret it. The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Big talk for someone outnumbered 12-1. Hand over the gun, and maybe we'll let you walk away. Malik didn't flinch. Not a chance. The leader's grin twisted into a snarl. He revved his engine, signaling his crew. They dismounted, one by one, forming a ring around Malik. Each man carried some kind of weapon, chains, bats, even a tire iron. Malik's mind raced, calculating his odds. It wasn't good, but he wasn't about to back down. As the first biker lunged, Malik reacted instinctively. He swung the rifle, the butt connecting with the man's jaw. The biker crumpled to the ground, groaning. Another rushed in, swinging a chain, but Malik ducked, sweeping the man's legs out from under him. 2 down. 10 to go. The remaining bikers hesitated, clearly shocked by Malik's skill. The leader barked orders, rallying them. They charged all at once. Malik fought hard, his training giving him an edge, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. A bat caught him in the ribs, and he stumbled, gasping for air. A chain wrapped around his wrist, yanking the rifle from his grasp. Pinned against a wall, Malik braced for the worst. The leader approached, his bat resting casually on his shoulder. Not so tough now, huh? He sneered. Just as the leader raised his bat, a sudden piercing whistle cut through the chaos. The bikers froze, turning toward the sound. From the shadows emerged Earl, his crowbar in hand and an expression of grim determination on his face. I warned you boys to leave him Alone, Earl growled, stepping into the circle. The leader's sneer faltered. You again? You just don't know when to quit. Old man. I could say the same about you, Earl shot back. With a sudden burst of speed, Earl swung the crowbar, knocking the bat from the leader's hands. The bikers charged, but Earl and Malik fought back with everything they had. It was a brutal, desperate struggle. By the time it was over, half the bikers were on the ground, groaning in pain, while the rest fled into the night. Breathing hard, Malik turned to Earl. I owe you one. Don't mention it, Earl said, wiping blood from his knuckles. But we've got a bigger problem. The fight had drawn attention. A few minutes later, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street. Malik and Earl stood side by side as two police cruisers pulled up. Officers poured out, guns drawn. Drop the weapon, one of them shouted, pointing at Malik. It's not what it looks like, Earl said quickly, stepping in front of Malik. These bikers attacked him. He was defending himself. The officers didn't lower their weapons. We got a report of gunshots in the area, one said, his tone accusatory. And now we find a soldier waving a rifle around. Malik's frustration boiled over. I didn't fire a shot. They came after me. The tension was thick. Finally, one of the officers lowered his gun and motioned for Malik to set the rifle on the ground. Reluctantly, he complied. They handcuffed him and Earl, ignoring their protests, and loaded them into the back of the cruiser. At the station, Malik and Earl sat in an interrogation room under harsh fluorescent lights. A detective entered, his face hard and unreadable. Tell me what happened, he said, sitting across from them. Malik explained everything, from the initial encounter with the bikers to the fight on the street. Earl backed him up, but the detective didn't seem convinced. Here's the problem, the detective said, leaning forward. We've got a dozen witnesses who claim you were the aggressor. That's a lie. Malik snapped, his fists clenched. They're covering for the bikers. The detective shrugged. Maybe not. Either way, you're in my town, and things don't look good for you. Earl slammed his hand on the table. This is bull. Enough, the detective interrupted, standing up. You'll stay here until we sort this out. They were left alone, the door locking behind the detective. Malik paced the small room, his frustration mounting. This is a setup, he muttered. They're trying to pin this on me. Earl nodded grimly. These bikers have the whole town in their pocket. But don't worry. We'll find a way to get you out of here. Hours later, the sound of raised voices echoed through the station. Malik and Earl looked up as the door opened, and a young black woman in a sharp business suit stepped inside. Her presence was commanding, her voice firm. My name is Aisha Campbell, she said, setting her briefcase on the table. I'm your attorney. And we're getting you out of here. Malik blinked, caught off guard. How did you? Your sister called me, Aisha interrupted. She said you might need some help. Looks like she was right. Earl grinned. About time someone in this town had some sense. Aisha didn't smile. This isn't over. The bikers will come after you again. And next time, they won't just bring chains and bats. Malik's jaw tightened. Let them come. I'm ready. But deep down, he knew the stakes had just been raised. The jail cell was cold and cramped, the kind of place that made even time feel heavier. Malik sat on the hard bench, his head in his hands, while Earl leaned against the wall, tapping his boot on the concrete floor. Your lawyer seems sharp, Earl said, breaking the silence. But you better hope she's faster than these bikers. Malik glanced up. You think they'll come after me here? Earl nodded. They've got connections. You'd be surprised how far their reach goes in a town like this. Before Malik could respond, the sound of keys jangling filled the corridor. Aisha appeared outside the cell, her expression calm but determined. Good news, she said, unlocking the door. You're both free to go. For now. Malik stood, relief washing over him. How did you pull that off? Let's just say I reminded the sheriff of a few constitutional rights. He seemed to have forgotten, Aisha replied with a faint smile. But don't get too comfortable. They're watching you. As they walked out of the station, the air felt heavier than before. Aisha handed Malik a card with her number on it. "Call me if anything happens," she said firmly. "And stick to well-lit areas. These guys don't play fair." Malik nodded, slipping the card into his pocket. Earl patted him on the shoulder. "I'll drive you back to the motel. Safer than walking." The drive was quiet, the tension between them palpable. As they neared the motel, Malik noticed a black van parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and it looked out of place among the older vehicles in the lot. "See that?" Malik asked, nodding toward the van. Earl squinted. "Yeah, doesn't look friendly." They parked a few spots away, keeping the van in their peripheral vision. Earl reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a revolver, checking the chamber. "Just in case," he muttered. Malik grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat, his military instincts on high alert. They approached the motel cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The van remained still, but something about it made Malik's skin crawl. Inside the motel room, Malik locked the door and drew the curtains. Earl set the revolver on the nightstand and sank into the worn armchair by the window. "You should try to get some rest," Earl said. "I'll keep watch." Malik nodded, though sleep felt like an impossibility. He lay on the lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Every noise outside made him tense. Hours passed, and just as his eyes started to close, a loud crash shattered the silence. Malik shot out of bed, grabbing his rifle. Earl was already at the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. "Damn it," Earl hissed. "They're here." Malik joined him, his heart pounding. 3 bikers stood by the black van, crowbars and bats in hand. Another 2 were by the motel's front office, smashing windows and laughing. "They're trying to draw us out," Earl said. "But they don't know who they're messing with." Malik nodded grimly. "We can't stay in here. They'll burn the place down if they have to." Earl grabbed the revolver and checked the ammo. "All right, soldier. You got a plan." Malik's mind raced. "We hit them hard and fast. They're not expecting a fight." Earl grinned. "Now you're talking." The 2 men slipped out through the bathroom window, landing silently in the alley behind the motel. The bikers were still focused on the front, their laughter echoing in the night. Malik and Earl moved like shadows, staying low as they crept toward the black van. Malik motioned for Earl to take the bikers on the left while he circled to the right. Earl nodded, his crowbar at the ready. Malik approached the van, keeping to the shadows. One of the bikers turned, his eyes widening in surprise as Malik emerged. Before the man could react, Malik swung the butt of his rifle, knocking him out cold. The commotion drew the attention of the other bikers. They turned just in time to see Earl charge, his crowbar swinging with deadly precision. One biker went down, clutching his arm, while another stumbled back, cursing. "Get them!" the leader shouted, stepping out of the van. He held a shotgun, its barrel glinting in the moonlight. Malik's blood ran cold. He had faced danger before. But something about this man, his unflinching gaze, the cruel smile tugging at his lips, made the stakes feel higher than ever. The leader leveled the shotgun at Malik. "End of the road, soldier boy." But before he could pull the trigger, a blinding light flooded the scene. Sirens wailed, and a police cruiser screeched to a halt, its tires kicking up gravel. Officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Drop your weapons," one of them shouted. The bikers froze, their faces a mix of shock and rage. The leader hesitated, his fingers still on the trigger. Malik held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. And then in one swift motion, the leader turned and fired, not at Malik, but at the police cruiser. The shotgun blast shattered the windshield, and chaos erupted. The officers opened fire, the bikers scattered, and Malik dove for cover behind the van. Earl joined him, his face pale but determined. "We gotta move," Earl shouted over the gunfire. Malik nodded, his grip tightening on the rifle. They sprinted toward the alley, weaving between parked cars as bullets flew past. Behind them, the scene was pure chaos, screaming gunshots, and the wail of sirens. They didn't stop until they were several blocks away, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Malik leaned against a brick wall, his mind racing. That was too close, he muttered. Earl nodded. They're not gonna stop, Malik. Not until one of us is dead. Malik's jaw tightened. He wasn't ready to die, but he also wasn't ready to run. This was personal now. Then we take the fight to them, Malik said, his voice steady. No more waiting. No more running. This ends tonight. The night air was thick with tension as Malik and Earl crouched in the shadows of an old warehouse on the edge of town. It was a decaying, forgotten place, with rusted metal, siding and shattered windows. Earl had insisted on bringing them here, calling it neutral ground. The bikers wouldn't expect them to regroup so quickly, and Malik planned to use that to his advantage. We can't just wait for them to come after us again, Malik said, checking the rifle for the third time. We need to hit them where it hurts. Earl leaned against a stack of wooden crates, his revolver in hand. I like the sound of that, soldier. But these boys don't scare easy. If we're going after them, we need a real plan. Malik nodded, his mind racing. What do you know about their hideout? They call it the Den, Earl said, his voice low. It's an old mechanic shop out on Route 17. Fortified like a damn fortress. They've got guns, bikes, and more muscle than you'd expect. But their leader? He's the real danger. Who is he? Malik asked. Name's Randy, Earl replied, his face darkening. Been running this gang for years. He's got a reputation for being ruthless and smart. That shotgun stunt back there? That's just a taste of what he's capable of. Malik tightened his grip on the rifle. If we take out Randy, the rest of them will crumble. Earl raised an eyebrow. You're talking about storming the Denver. That's suicide. No, Malik said firmly. It's strategy. We hit them before they can regroup. Take out their leader, and they'll scatter. Earl sighed, rubbing his temples. All right. If we're doing this, we're doing it smart. But we're gonna need more firepower. By dawn, they had a plan. Earl knew a guy, an old friend named Jake, who owed him a favor. Jake ran a pawn shop that doubled as a black market weapons dealer. He wasn't thrilled about being dragged into the mess, but eventually agreed to help. You're insane, Jake said, handing Malik a tactical shotgun. Going up against Randy and his crew? You're outnumbered 10-1. Just make sure this works, Malik replied, inspecting the weapon. We'll handle the rest. Jake shook his head, muttering under his breath as he handed Earl a box of ammo. You're gonna get yourselves killed. By nightfall, they were ready. Malik and Earl parked a mile from the den, hidden in the shadows of a grove of trees. From their vantage point, they could see the glow of the garage lights and hear the low rumble of engines. This is it, Malik said, his voice steady. We go in fast and hit hard. Earl nodded. Remember, Randy's mine. I've got a score to settle. Malik didn't argue. He knew Earl's grudge against Randy ran deep. Whatever it was, he'd let the older man have his shot. They crept through the woods, staying low and silent. As they neared the den, the scale of the operation became clear. Bikes were lined up in neat rows, and several armed men patrolled the perimeter. Malik signaled for Earl to take the left flank while he moved to the right. They waited for the perfect moment, watching as one of the guards wandered too far from the others. Now, Malik moved like a shadow, taking the guard down with a swift blow to the back of the head. Earl did the same on his side, dragging the unconscious man into the bushes. They were in. Inside the den, the atmosphere was tense. Randy sat at a large table in the center of the garage, surrounded by his lieutenants. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat in front of him, and his shotgun was within arm's reach. They think they can mess with us. Randy growled, slamming his fist on the table. We're gonna show that soldier boy what happens when you cross the devil's sons. Malik and Earl watched from the shadows, their hearts pounding. This was their moment. Malik raised his rifle, taking aim at Randy. But before he could pull the trigger, a loud clatter echoed through the garage. One of the bikers had stumbled onto Earl, who had been sneaking around the back. The man shouted, and all hell broke loose. "Get him!" Randy roared, grabbing his shotgun. Malik didn't hesitate. He fired a shot, taking down one of the lieutenants. The garage erupted into chaos as bikers scrambled for weapons. Earl fought like a man possessed, swinging his crowbar with deadly precision. But Randy was fast. He ducked behind the table, firing his shotgun blindly. Malik dove for cover, bullets ricocheting off the metal walls. "Earl!" Malik shouted. "We need to get to Randy." "I'm working on it," Earl yelled back, dodging a swing from one of the bikers. Malik moved through the chaos, taking out bikers as he went. His military training gave him the edge, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. Just as he reached Randy's table, the leader lunged at him, swinging the shotgun like a club. The impact sent Malik sprawling, his rifle skidding across the floor. Randy loomed over him, a triumphant sneer on his face. "This is where it ends," Randy snarled, raising the shotgun. Before he could pull the trigger, Earl appeared out of nowhere, tackling Randy to the ground. The two men grappled, fists flying, as Malik scrambled for his rifle. Randy managed to break free, grabbing a knife from his belt. He slashed at Earl, catching him across the arm. Earl cried out in pain, but he didn't back down. With a roar, he swung his crowbar, striking Randy in the side of the head. The leader collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. The remaining bikers froze, their eyes wide with shock. "It's over," Malik shouted, leveling his rifle at the group. "Drop your weapons." One by one, the bikers complied, their weapons clattering to the floor. Malik's heart pounded as he surveyed the scene. Randy lay motionless, and the Devil's sons were defeated. But as Malik turned to help Earl, a faint noise caught his attention, a low wheezing laugh. Randy wasn't dead. Before Malik could react, Randy reached for his shotgun, his bloodied face twisted into a grin. And then, a deafening boom echoed through the garage. Randy's body jolted, the shotgun clattering from his grasp as he slumped lifelessly to the floor. Malik turned, stunned, to see Earl standing there, his revolver smoking in his trembling hand. Blood dripped from Earl's wounded arm, but his face was set with grim determination. "You don't get back up from that," Earl muttered, lowering the gun. The remaining bikers froze, their defiance evaporating. One by one, they raised their hands, realizing the fight was over. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint crackle of an engine in the distance. Malik knelt beside Earl, his heart still pounding. "You okay?" Earl winced, clutching his arm. "Been worse. Let's finish this before the cavalry arrives." Malik nodded, grabbing a length of rope from one of the workbenches. He quickly tied up the remaining bikers while Earl kept his revolver trained on them. The look in their eyes had changed. They were no longer the cocky, swaggering thugs they had been moments ago. With Randy gone, their bravado had crumbled. "You've got two choices," Malik said, his voice cold and steady. "Leave town tonight, or end up in a cell. Either way, this is done." The men didn't argue. One of them muttered something under his breath, but the rest just nodded silently. Malik felt a flicker of satisfaction but knew better than to let his guard down. The Devil's sons might be broken, but their remnants could still be dangerous. As the bikers were marched outside, headlights suddenly illuminated the lot. Malik tensed, gripping his rifle, but the vehicle turned out to be a police cruiser. Aisha stepped out, flanked by two officers. She looked around, her sharp eyes taking in the scene, the blood, the scattered weapons, the defeated bikers. "I'd say you've been busy," she said, her tone half admiring, half exasperated. "Didn't have much of a choice," Malik replied, lowering his rifle. "But I think it's over now." The officers began taking statements, cuffing the remaining bikers and loading them into the cruiser. Aisha pulled Malik and Earl aside, her expression serious. "Randy's death is going to cause a stir," she said. "Even with witnesses, you're not out of the woods. People like him always have someone waiting to take their place." Malik nodded grimly. "We'll deal with that if it comes. Right now, I just want to make sure Kayla's safe. I've already arranged extra Security at her dorm, Aisha assured him. She's worried about you, by the way. You should call her. Earl chuckled, though. His laugh was more of a wheeze. You've got yourself a good sister there, Malik. She's the reason I came here in the first place, Malik said quietly. I wasn't about to let people like this ruin her life. The aftermath of the showdown at the den rippled through the town like a shockwave. By morning, the news had spread, Randy was dead, and the Devil's Sons were no more. Malik and Earl became unlikely heroes in the eyes of some, while others regarded them with suspicion. For Malik, the attention was unwelcome. He spent the next few days keeping a low profile, checking in on Kayla and helping Earl recover from his injuries. Aisha stayed in touch, keeping them informed about the legal fallout. The bikers who had been arrested were cooperating, eager to distance themselves from Randy's crimes. Still, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't truly over. There was a restlessness in the air, a sense that something or someone was waiting in the shadows. It was on the third night after the fight that the first sign appeared. Malik was walking back to his motel when he noticed a spray-painted message on the wall of a nearby building. This isn't over. The words sent a chill down his spine. He scanned the area, but the streets were empty. Whoever had left the message was long gone. Malik quickened his pace, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung over his shoulder. When he reached the motel, Earl was waiting in the room, his arm in a sling. Something wrong? Earl asked, noticing Malik's tense expression. Found a message, Malik replied, closing the door behind him. They're trying to intimidate us. Earl frowned. You think it's Randy's crew? Maybe, Malik said. Or maybe it's someone worse. Later that night, Malik sat by the window, staring out at the dark street below. The events of the past week replayed in his mind. The fights, the threats, the gunfire. He had thought defeating Randy would bring peace, but it seemed to have only stirred up more trouble. A sudden noise jolted him from his thoughts. It was faint but distinct, the soft hum of a motorcycle engine. Malik leaned closer to the window, his pulse quickening. At first, he saw nothing. Then, out of the shadows, a single figure emerged, riding a sleek black bike. The rider stopped in front of the motel, their face hidden beneath a helmet. They stayed there for a moment, as if watching, before revving the engine and disappearing into the night. Malik's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, Malik found Earl already awake, sitting at the motel room's small table with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. They're testing us, Earl said, not bothering to look up as Malik sat across from him. That rider. Last night? They're sending a message. I got the same feeling, Malik replied, his tone cold. And I don't like it. Earl leaned back, wincing as his injured arm shifted. Randy's crew might be scattered, but they've still got allies. These biker gangs stick together like a bad rash. Someone out there is looking to settle the score. Malik nodded slowly. We need to figure out who's behind this before they come at us full force. Earl drained the last of his coffee and smirked. Then it's time we went hunting. Their first stop was the pawn shop where Earl's contact, Jake, had helped them before. The place looked the same, dimly lit, dusty, and cluttered with mismatched merchandise. Jake was behind the counter, nervously polishing a revolver when they walked in. Didn't think I'd see you two again so soon, Jake said, his voice tight. What do you need this time? Information, Malik said, stepping closer. There's a new player in town. Someone who's trying to pick up where Randy left off. Any idea who it could be? Jake hesitated, glancing nervously around the shop. You're not the only ones asking questions. Word is, someone from out of state's been sniffing around. Coles himself. Viper. Supposed to be worse than Randy, smarter meaner. Earl raised an eyebrow. Viper, huh? Sounds like the kind of guy who'd leave a message like the one Malik found. Could be, Jake said, lowering his voice. But if I were you, I'd stay out of his way. People like him don't just play dirty, they make it personal. Malik exchanged a glance with Earl. Where can we find him? Jake sighed, clearly unhappy about getting involved. Last I heard, He's holed up at an abandoned truck stop on the outskirts of town. But don't say I didn't warn you. The truck stop was a desolate, crumbling ruin surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting machinery. Malik and Earl parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, their weapons ready. The place was eerily quiet. A few bikes were parked outside, but there was no sign of movement. Malik scanned the area, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "Stay sharp," he whispered to Earl. They crept closer, sticking to the shadows. As they neared the main building, Malik spotted a faint glow coming from one of the windows. He motioned for Earl to follow him, and together they moved silently toward the light. Peering inside, Malik saw a group of bikers gathered around a table, their faces illuminated by a flickering lantern. At the head of the table sat a man with a lean, angular face and a snake tattoo curling up his neck. His eyes were cold and calculating, and his presence commanded respect. "That's him," Earl whispered. "Viper." Malik studied the scene carefully. There were at least 6 bikers inside, all armed, and no clear way to take them by surprise. He gestured for Earl to retreat, and they moved back to a safe distance to strategize. "We can't take them head-on," Malik said, keeping his voice low. "We need to draw them out." Earl nodded. "I've got an idea. Let's give them something to chase." Moments later, a loud crash echoed through the truck stop as Earl threw a rock through one of the windows. The bikers inside jumped to their feet, grabbing their weapons. Outside, Viper barked, "Find whoever did that." The bikers poured out of the building, spreading out as they searched the area. Malik and Earl watched from their hiding spot, waiting for the right moment to strike. As one of the bikers passed by, Malik moved swiftly, taking him down with a silent blow to the back of the head. Earl did the same with another, dragging the unconscious men out of sight. It didn't take long for the others to realize something was wrong. Shouts filled the air as the remaining bikers regrouped, their movements more frantic. "Stay together," Viper shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. Malik and Earl retreated deeper into the shadows, luring the bikers farther from the truck stop. One by one, they picked off the stragglers, whittling down Viper's forces until only he remained. Viper stood alone in the clearing, his gun drawn and his eyes scanning the darkness. "You think you're clever," he called out, his voice echoing. "Come on, out and face me like men." Malik stepped forward, his rifle aimed squarely at Viper. "It's over. Drop the gun." Viper laughed, a low menacing sound. "You think taking out Randy makes you the king of the hill? You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Earl emerged from the shadows, his revolver trained on Viper. "We know enough. Now drop it before we put you down." For a moment, Viper hesitated. Then with a sudden fluid motion, he threw a flashbang grenade at their feet. The world erupted in light and sound, blinding and deafening them. When the smoke cleared, Viper was gone. Malik cursed, his ears ringing as he scanned the area. "He's getting away." Earl steadied himself, his face set with determination. "Then we track him down. This ends tonight." The sound of a motorcycle engine roared in the distance, fading as Viper sped away into the night. Malik and Earl stood in the clearing, the acrid smell of the flashbang still lingering in the air. Earl wiped his face with his sleeve, his injured arm trembling slightly. "Damn snake," Earl muttered. He planned that escape. Malik's jaw tightened. "He's running, but he won't get far." Earl nodded, his voice laced with determination. "Then let's hunt him down." They sprinted back to Earl's truck, adrenaline pushing them past their exhaustion. Malik climbed into the passenger seat while Earl slid behind the wheel, the old vehicle growling to life. The tires kicked up dirt as they sped out of the abandoned lot, following the faint taillights disappearing into the darkness. "He's got a head start," Malik said, scanning the horizon. "But he won't be expecting us to come after him this fast." Earl smirked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's about to learn the hard way." The chase took them down narrow back roads, the truck bouncing over potholes as Earl pushed it to its limits. Malik kept his rifle ready, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of Viper. Finally, a glint of light caught his attention, a reflection off the chrome of a bike. There! Malik shouted, pointing ahead. Viper had slowed, his bike weaving slightly as if he thought he had lost them. Earl slammed his foot on the gas, the truck gaining ground. Viper must have heard the engine, because he turned to look back, his face twisting in anger. "You're not getting away!" Earl yelled, his voice muffled by the wind whipping through the open windows. Viper suddenly veered off the road, cutting through a field of tall grass. Earl followed, the truck's headlights bouncing as they tore through the uneven terrain. Malik steadied himself, gripping the door handle to keep from being thrown around. "He's heading toward the quarry," Earl said, his voice grim. "That place is a death trap." Malik's eyes narrowed. "Then we corner him before he gets there." The quarry loomed ahead, its jagged cliffs and deep pits bathed in moonlight. Viper's bike skidded to a stop near the edge of a steep drop, the gravel beneath his tires sending small rocks tumbling into the abyss. He turned to face them, pulling a pistol from his waistband. Earl slammed on the brakes, the truck sliding to a stop a few yards away. "Malik." And Earl jumped out, weapons raised. "End of the line, Viper," Malik said, his voice steady but full of fury. Viper laughed. A wild, almost unhinged sound. "You think you've won? You've got no idea what you've stepped into." "You're done," Earl growled, stepping closer. "Drop the gun and save yourself the trouble." But Viper didn't move. Instead, he raised his pistol and fired, the shot narrowly missing Earl's head. Malik reacted instantly, firing a warning shot that struck the ground near Viper's feet. "Last chance," Malik warned. "Drop it, or I won't miss." For a moment, Viper seemed to consider his options. Then, with a defiant smirk, he backed toward the edge of the quarry, his pistol still aimed at them. "You think killing me will stop this?" he sneered. "There's more where I came from. You're just pawns in a much bigger game. Then you won't be around to play it," Earl shot back, his revolver aimed squarely at Viper's chest. Before anyone could react, Viper made his move. He threw a knife from his boot, aiming for Earl's injured arm. Earl dodged just in time, but the distraction gave Viper a split second to dive off the edge of the quarry. Malik ran forward, peering over the cliff. He could see Viper scrambling down a narrow path that hugged the rock wall, his movements quick and sure. "He's not getting away," Malik said, his voice cold. Earl nodded. "Let's end this." They carefully descended the path, their weapons at the ready. The quarry was eerily quiet, the air heavy with tension. Malik's boots scraped against the loose gravel, every step bringing him closer to the showdown he knew was inevitable. As they reached the bottom, Viper emerged from the shadows, his pistol raised. The moonlight reflected off his snake tattoo, giving him an almost sinister glow. "You should have stayed out of this," Viper said, his voice calm but venomous. "Now you're in over your heads." Malik didn't flinch. "You made it personal. Now it's over." The standoff was electric, each man waiting for the other to make the first move. Malik's finger hovered over the trigger, his breathing steady. Earl stood at his side, his revolver unwavering despite his injuries. Suddenly, Viper lunged, firing as he moved. The shot grazed Malik's shoulder, pain lancing through him, but he didn't falter. He squeezed the trigger, the rifle's sharp crack cutting through the air. The bullet struck Viper's leg, and he collapsed with a roar of pain. Earl rushed forward, kicking Viper's pistol out of reach. Malik followed, his rifle aimed at Viper's chest. "It's over," Malik said, his voice low and firm. "You've got nowhere left to run." Viper laughed bitterly, blood seeping from his leg. "You think this changes anything? There's always someone willing to take my place." "Then they'll meet the same fate," Earl said, his voice like steel. Malik and Earl called the authorities, ensuring Viper was taken into custody. The fight was finally over, but the weight of it lingered as they climbed back to the top of the quarry. The moon was beginning to set, its light fading as dawn approached. "Think we've seen the last of them?" Earl asked, his voice quiet. Malik stared at the horizon, his expression unreadable. "For now. But if they come back, we'll be ready." Earl smiled faintly. "Damn right we will." As the first rays of sunlight broke over the quarry, Malik felt a sense of resolve settle over him. The battle might be over, but the war against people like Viper wasn't. And he was ready for whatever came next. The dawn broke over Wayland, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Malik stood outside the sheriff's office, watching as Viper was dragged inside in cuffs, his face twisted in a mixture of pain and rage. Earl leaned against the truck nearby, his injured arm bandaged but his revolver still holstered, a silent statement that he wasn't letting his guard down. "You think this'll stick?" Malik asked, his voice low. Earl let out a humorless chuckle. "Depends on who's got the judge in their pocket. But we've done our part. The rest is up to the system." Malik nodded, though his gut told him that wasn't the end of it. Men like Viper had ways of wriggling out of consequences. But for now, it was a victory, however temporary. Back at the motel, Malik finally called Kayla, who had been waiting anxiously for news. "Are you okay?" she asked the moment she picked up. Her voice trembled, a mixture of relief and worry. "I'm fine," Malik assured her. "It's over for now. Don't you dare downplay it," Kayla snapped, her tone fierce. "I've been watching the news. They're saying you and Earl took down the Devil's Sons and some dangerous out-of-town leader." "That's not nothing, Malik." Malik smiled faintly. "I just did what needed to be done. That's all. Promise me you'll be careful," she said, her voice softening. "I can't lose you." "You won't," he said firmly. "I promise." As night fell, Malik and Earl sat in the motel room, a quiet tension hanging between them. Earl poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one across the table to Malik. "To surviving the madness," Earl said, raising his glass. Malik clinked his glass against Earl's, though his mind was still restless. Something didn't feel right. The fight at the quarry had been too chaotic, too rushed. It wasn't like Randy's crew to let things fall apart so easily, even with their leader gone. "What's eating at you?" Earl asked, watching Malik closely. "Viper didn't act like a man who lost," Malik said after a moment. "Even when we had him cornered, he was calm, like he knew something we didn't." Earl frowned. "You think he's got a backup plan?" "I think this might have been part of it," Malik replied. "A distraction, maybe. Or a setup." Earl cursed under his breath. "If he's got something up his sleeve, we'll be ready. But for now, we need to catch our breath." They didn't get much time to rest. Just after midnight, the phone in the motel room rang, shattering the silence. Malik picked it up, his instincts immediately on edge. "Malik Thomas," a deep voice on the other end said. "Who's asking?" Malik replied, his tone wary. "Let's just say I'm someone who's been watching this whole mess unfold. And you've made some powerful enemies." Malik's grip tightened on the phone. "If this is a threat, you're wasting your time." The voice chuckled darkly. "Not a threat. A warning. Viper wasn't working alone. And the people he answers to? They're already on their way." The line went dead before Malik could respond. He slammed the receiver down, his heart racing. "What is it?" Earl asked, sitting up straight. "Trouble," Malik said grimly. "Viper's part of something bigger. And they're coming." Within the hour, headlights appeared on the horizon. Not just one or two, but a long line of vehicles, a convoy of motorcycles, trucks, and SUVs moving steadily toward Wayland. Malik and Earl watched from the motel parking lot, the tension between them palpable. "They're making a statement," Earl muttered. "Rolling in like they own the place." Malik nodded. "And they're not here to talk." The convoy stopped a few blocks away, the roar of engines fading as the riders dismounted. At the center of the group stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in a leather jacket, his face partially obscured by a bandana. He exuded authority, his presence commanding even from a distance. "That must be their real boss," Earl said, his voice tight. Viper was just the tip of the spear. Malik's eyes narrowed. "Then we cut the spear at its base." The leader raised his hand, and his group began to spread out, moving toward the surrounding buildings. They were clearly looking for Malik and Earl. The bikers shouted, banged on doors, and revved their engines, making it impossible to ignore their presence. Malik and Earl retreated into the motel room, their weapons at the ready. Earl pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. "They're searching for us," he said. "But they don't know exactly where we are." "Not yet." Malik's mind raced. They couldn't fight this group head-on, not in a crowded area, with civilians at risk. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. "We lure them out," Malik said, his voice steady. "Away from the town. Make them come to us." "And then what?" Earl asked. "We're two against an army. We won't need to fight them all," Malik said. "Just the leader. Take him out, and the rest will fall apart." Earl considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But we're gonna need more than just grit to pull this off." Malik grabbed the phone, dialing Aisha. When she answered, he wasted no time. "We've got a situation," he said quickly. "And we need backup." Aisha didn't hesitate. "I'll bring what I can. Hold tight." Minutes later, Malik and Earl slipped out of the motel and into the shadows, their movements swift and silent. They needed to stay ahead of the bikers, to draw them into open terrain where they could control the fight. As they reached the edge of town, the distant rumble of engines grew louder. The bikers had found their trail and were closing in fast. "This is it," Malik said, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We end this here." The night air was electric, heavy with the roar of engines and the shouts of the advancing bikers. Malik and Earl crouched in the brush at the edge of an abandoned industrial site, their breath steady but hearts racing. This was the moment they had prepared for, a final stand against an enemy that seemed insurmountable. "They'll be here any second," Earl said, checking the revolver in his good hand. "You ready for this, soldier?" Malik nodded, his rifle balanced against his shoulder. "Ready as I'll ever be." The convoy of bikers spilled into the open yard, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. At their center was the imposing leader, his broad figure silhouetted against the chaos. He dismounted his bike with a practiced ease, surveying the area like a predator stalking its prey. "Malik Thomas," the leader's voice boomed, echoing off the rusted walls of the old factory. "I know you're out here. Come on out, and maybe we'll make this quick." Malik glanced at Earl, their silent exchange carrying more weight than words ever could. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the brink of exhaustion, but they weren't about to back down. Malik stepped into the light, his rifle at the ready. The leader's eyes lit up with recognition, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "There he is," the man sneered. "The soldier boy who thinks he can take on the world." "I don't need the world," Malik replied coldly. "Just you." The leader laughed, spreading his arms wide. "You think this ends with me? You're playing a losing game, kid." Malik's voice didn't waver. "We'll see." Earl emerged next, his revolver aimed at the nearest biker. "You've got two options," Earl called out. "Turn around and leave, or end up like your buddy Viper." The leader's face darkened at the mention of Viper, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he gestured to his men, who began fanning out, weapons in hand. "Take them," the leader growled. "Alive, if you can. Dead, if you must." The first wave of bikers charged, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. Malik fired a precise shot, dropping the nearest attacker before shifting his aim to the next. Earl moved with surprising agility, his crowbar swinging with deadly force as he fought off the advancing mob. The fight was brutal and chaotic, the air thick with gunfire and shouts. Malik's military training gave him an edge, but the sheer number of opponents was overwhelming. He ducked behind a stack of rusted barrels, narrowly avoiding a swing from a chain-wielding biker. Earl, despite his injured arm, held his ground with grit and determination. But even he couldn't hold off the relentless assault. Forever. A biker lunged at him with a knife, catching Earl off guard and sending him sprawling to the ground. "Earl!" Malik shouted, firing a shot that hit the attacker square in the chest. Earl scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from a gash on his side. "I'm fine," he panted. "Just keep going." The bikers began to falter, their ranks thinning as Malik and Earl held their ground. But the leader remained untouched, watching the battle with a cold, calculating gaze. Finally, the leader stepped forward, drawing a large serrated blade from his belt. "Enough games," he snarled, his voice dripping with menace. "Let's finish this." He charged at Malik with surprising speed, forcing Malik to drop his rifle and meet the attack. Head on. The two men clashed, their struggle fierce and unrelenting. The leader's strength was immense, but Malik's training and determination kept him in the fight. Earl tried to intervene, but another biker tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Malik was on his own. The leader drove Malik back, his blade slashing dangerously close. Malik ducked and weaved, searching for an opening. Finally, he saw his chance. As the leader swung wide, Malik grabbed a length of metal pipe from the ground and struck hard, the impact echoing like a thunderclap. The leader stumbled, blood trickling from a gash on his temple. Malik didn't let up. He swung again and again, each blow fueled by the pain, anger, and determination that had carried him this far. The leader collapsed to his knees, his knife clattering to the ground. Malik stood over him, breathing hard, the pipe still in his hands. "Do it," the leader hissed, blood staining his teeth. "Finish it." Malik hesitated, his grip tightening on the pipe. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to end it, to make sure this man never hurt anyone again. But something stopped him. Something deeper, more resolute. "I'm not like you," Malik said, quietly, dropping the pipe. The sound of sirens filled the air, cutting through the tension. Aisha had arrived with reinforcements, local police and state troopers flooding the scene. The remaining bikers surrendered quickly, their will to fight crushed. As the dust settled, Malik and Earl stood side by side, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. Aisha approached, her expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You did it," she said simply. Malik shook his head. "We didn't win. We just survived." Earl chuckled, wincing as he clutched his injured side. "Surviving's a win in my book." The leader was loaded into a police van, his face twisted in fury. As he was driven away, Malik felt a strange sense of closure. The fight was over, for now. In the days that followed, Malik prepared to leave Wayland. He said goodbye to Earl, whose arm was in a proper cast but whose spirits were as high as ever. "You take care of yourself, soldier," Earl said, gripping Malik's hand firmly. "And don't let anyone tell you you're not a damn hero." Malik smiled faintly. "Same to you, old man." He spent his last night in town with Kayla, sitting on the porch of her dorm and watching the stars. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Malik replied. "But I'll be back to visit." "Promise." Kayla nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're my hero, Malik. Don't ever forget that." As the sun rose the next morning, Malik climbed onto the bus that would take him away from Wayland. The fight had changed him, tested him in ways he hadn't expected. But it had also reminded him of what mattered most, protecting the people he loved, no matter the cost. And as the bus pulled away, Malik knew that no matter where life took him next, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.